He was the wizard even monsters whispered about, a scholar in flowing robes who walked softly through a world that trembled beneath the force of his choices. To some he was the steward of hope, the steady hand upon the gates of Hogwarts, the patient teacher who believed that mercy could change a life. To others he was something colder and far more unsettling, a tactician whose kindness never quite hid the reach of his design. To understand Albus Dumbledore is to step into the hush between courage and calculation, to listen for the heartbeat of consequence under every gentle word, to admit that light itself can cast a very long shadow. This is the story of a life that was never simple. It begins in a village where history moves like a breeze under old trees and ends high above a lake, where stars gather in the black water like lanterns for the dead. It is a tale braided from grief and brilliance, from hard lessons and harder promises, from patience that saved a generation and secrecy that nearly broke it. Follow his footsteps, and you will see the cost of genius. Walk beside him, and you will feel the cold weight of regret. Look back from the far shore, and you may decide he saved the world. Look closer still, and you may wonder at the price he asked others to pay. Albus Dumbledore was born in Godric's Hollow, a place already heavy with legend. The house that held his childhood contained ordinary sounds, warm laughter, quarrels over chores, the creak of a stair at night, and a hush that fell whenever his sister's name was spoken. Ariana was the point around which that household turned. What happened to her in a lonely moment, with cruel muggle boys left scars no healer could smooth. Her magic bucked and raged inside her like a storm penned in glass. Their father, Percival, struck back at the culprits and paid in iron and sea wind, buried alive by a prison that eats at the soul. Their mother, Kendra, held what remained together with stubborn love, and Albus grew up with an education in grief that no classroom could teach. He was bright from the beginning. Teachers loved him, parchment adored his quill, and problems opened before him like locks before a careful hand. At Hogwarts, he gathered accolades the way a forest gathers dawn, quietly and in abundance. He was brilliant at charms and transfiguration, keen in defense, voracious in history, and gentle with those who needed help mastering small things. He became known for thinking 5 steps past every question and then circling back to show classmates the path. He made friends who would testify, even years later, that his smile could turn a cold corridor into a summer lane. He also made rivals who understood that behind the warmth lived a mind that missed little and forgot less. He returned home for holidays to a house that needed him. Aberforth, fiercely loyal, bristled with protective love for Ariana. Kendra tried to keep wind and weather away from the fragile light of her daughter. Albus, newly crowned with accolades, felt the tug of adventure and the ache of duty. He wanted to blaze across the world and remake it into something kinder. He also wanted to be a good son and a better brother. That tension, that constant pull, would become the iron thread of his life. The tragedy that took Kendra from her children shattered what little stability remained. In the quiet after that loss, Godric's Hollow acquired a new resident, a brilliant meteor of a boy who lodged with Bathilda Bagshot and walked the lanes with a gaze that sliced through stone. Gellert Grindelwald arrived like a spark to dry tinder. Between him and Albus, a friendship kindled that was equal parts intellectual feast and moral experiment. They talked deep into the night about a world broken by prejudice and fear. They agreed that power had to be used, and that those who understood the future had a duty to shape it. They named their dream the greater good, a phrase as soothing as a lullaby and as dangerous as a slow poison. There is a particular intoxication in thinking that wisdom grants permission. The 2 young visionaries mapped a new order in which chaos would be tamed and suffering diminished by the strong guidance of the gifted. In private letters and sunlit conversations, they pictured a realm where wizards would step out of hiding and remake the laws of power. It is easy to do harm when the harm looks like a road to mercy. It is easy to forget that every plan, no matter how noble, turns on the axle of individual lives. Aberforth saw it. He saw his brother drifting away from the hearth, saw Ariana becoming a line on a parchment instead of a human soul at the center of their home. He confronted them. Pride flared. Words cut. Wands rose. What happened next was a catastrophe that echoed forever. In the crossfire of fury and love, Ariana fell. Silence flooded the room. The dream curdled to ash in a single heartbeat. Grindelwald fled into the world, chasing conquest with winter in his eyes. Albus collapsed under the weight of a guilt that had no bottom. From that day, the arc of Dumbledore's life bent away from grand designs and toward vigilant restraint. He had learned how easily brilliance can turn ruthless. When it convinces itself it is kind. Grief taught him a new grammar of responsibility. He studied, he taught, he served. He returned to Hogwarts and buried himself in work that built rather than conquered. Students met a professor whose praise was a balm, and whose disappointment could make a corridor feel as cold as the moon. Colleagues met a partner who shared credit freely and pushed debate without drawing blood. Those who knew him best detected the iron under the velvet. He had not weakened, he had anchored. Beyond the castle walls the world shifted. Grindelwald gathered followers and wrapped his cause in banners and promises. His rhetoric was a blade with words for teeth. He whispered of order, of destiny, of safety secured by the strong. Countries tore along old seams. Families rearranged their loyalties under the pressure of fear. Dumbledore watched. He counseled. He prepared. He would not unleash his power casually again, not even for a cause he believed righteous. He waited until duty outweighed dread. Their confrontation became legend, a duel for the soul of the age. It was not simply a contest of spells. It was a reckoning between the boy who had almost destroyed his sister and the man who had vowed never to mistake brilliance for entitlement again. When it was over, Grindelwald lay defeated and locked away in a prison of his own making. Dumbledore carried home victory heavy as a coffin. He took from that battle not triumph, but confirmation of a principle that would define him forever. Power is safest when it mistrusts itself. With reputation remade and influence expanding, he refused the highest offices beyond the school. He chose instead a life of scholarship and guardianship. Hogwarts under his care became a sanctuary of curiosity and patient correction. He let children make mistakes and then taught them how to right them. He let zeal bloom and then pruned it before it turned cruel. He did not banish ambition. He trained it to serve compassion. He also studied mysteries that most magicians only fear in stories told by firelight. Old wand lore and deeper history drew him like a tide. He traced the legend of 3 hallowed objects, not as a treasure hunter, but as a philosopher, interested in what the hunt reveals about the hunter. In time he would admit that he had not been immune to the allure of relics that promised mastery over death and destiny. He learned to step back from that edge before it claimed him, a lesson that would later save lives. Another child entered his path, a boy in an orphanage, whose eyes watched the world the way a predator watches a pen. Tom Riddle met the professor with a kind of wary hunger. He was gifted, precise, hungry for control, and skilled at hiding cruelty behind a mask of polite charm. Dumbledore saw the pattern forming in him, the way a mathematician sees a theorem waiting to be written. He invited the boy to Hogwarts and kept careful watch. He offered trust but not blindness. He gave chances but did not surrender discernment. Years later, when the name Tom Riddle had been set aside and a darker persona had taken its place, Dumbledore would be accused of underestimating his foe. The truth is both simpler and more complex. He recognized the threat early. He also believed that even the worst among us deserves at least one door to better choices left unlocked. As the shadows advanced again, Dumbledore did what leaders must do when institutions are slow and hearts are frightened. He gathered people willing to risk comfort for a cause. The Order of the Phoenix was less an army than a promise, a fellowship built on stubborn courage and quiet defiance. In rooms without banners and on roads without parades, its members carried messages, smuggled the threatened, and stood against the tide. Dumbledore never sent others where he would not go. He did, however, begin to move pieces across a larger board, and that is where judgment of him splits like a fork in a river. He became a strategist, whose maps were drawn not on paper, but on the lives of those who trusted him. He discovered that Tom Riddle had fractured his soul and hidden the shards in objects laced with murder. He followed clues through ink and blood, through neglected memories and cursed corridors. He wrestled with the problem of how to destroy protections that were built from acts of ultimate violation. He understood, perhaps before anyone else did, that victory would require not merely bravery in battle, but a kind of spiritual clarity in which love becomes a weapon stronger than any curse. In pursuing those shards, he found a ring that carried more than a stain. It bore a story he had once pursued for its seductive promise. He recognized a crest and a stone that whispered of reunion with the lost. Grief, that old companion, reached out a hand. He took it. In that single moment of weakness, the ring bit. The curse saturated bone and blood. He contained it with power most would never see. But the clock began to wind down. The man who had guided others from beyond the reach of death now had to plan his own exit from the stage. There was a boy to consider. The infant who had survived a killing curse had grown into a student with a scar that ached when evil drew close. Dumbledore watched him closely and loved him stubbornly. He taught him what he could and withheld what he must, balancing disclosure and delay like a juggler under fire. He cultivated in the boy not blind obedience, but a habit of choosing what is right, even when it hurts. He knew a day would come when he would have to place the full truth in those young hands, and he feared what that truth would do. Yet he believed that shielding a soul forever is another way of breaking it. The endgame formed around a tower windswept and bare. Dumbledore made a pact with a man the world called traitor, and he called ally. Severus Snape was many things at once: a cruel teacher and a broken penitent, an artist in potions and a devotee of a love that outlived its object. Dumbledore asked the hardest thing of him. He asked him to preserve a boy's chance at redemption by staining his own hands deeper. He asked him to spare another child, Draco Malfoy, from a first murder that would shatter what was left of his innocence. He asked him to take the blame and carry it alone. Before that night, Dumbledore took the same boy with the scar to a black shore where waves slapped rock like drumbeats for war. They entered a cave cut by ancient magic and drank poison from a basin that protected a counterfeit treasure. The potion tore screams from the throat of the greatest wizard of the age. The boy forced the draught on him because he had been told to do so, and because mercy sometimes looks like cruelty in the moment. Inferi rose from the water like the past refusing to stay buried. Fire answered. They escaped, but the headmaster was spent. Back at the tower, the bargain was honored. Wands flashed, a curse threw the old wizard from the battlements. His body fell, and the whole of Hogwarts seemed to hold its breath between one heartbeat and the next. Those who loved him saw murder. Those who knew the plan saw sacrifice. Those who were not sure would never be entirely certain again. That ambiguity was part of what he left behind. A final lesson in how truth can wear more than one face. After his death, the work he had been doing unfurled like a map. The boy with the scar followed the trail of memories Dumbledore had collected and the clues he had planted. Friends stood through fear and fatigue. Allies emerged in unlikely places. In the last reckoning, the boy faced the serpent-eyed tyrant, not as a soldier conditioned to obey, but as a person who had learned that love is not weakness, and that death is not an enemy to be mastered, but a limit to be accepted. Dumbledore's hand was not on the wand that day, but his fingerprints were on every choice that made the ending possible. What, then, is the legacy of Albus Dumbledore? Ask a survivor, and you may hear about a mentor who met terror with twinkling eyes and tea. Ask a skeptic, And you may hear about a manipulator who nudged people toward fate without telling them what lay at the end of the road. Both are right. He was a guardian who understood that leadership is not a shield from moral compromise, but a workshop for it. He believed that intention matters and consequence matters more. He believed that love redeems even when it does not cure. He believed that death should be faced with dignity, not cheated with trinkets. He believed that the best education is not instruction but invitation, an opening of doors and a steadying of the steps of those who walk through. He was not naive. He knew that mercy without discernment breeds monsters, and that discipline without compassion breeds tyrants. He sought the narrow path between. He stumbled. He learned. He adapted. He hid some truths because he feared what they would do in the wrong hands. He revealed others because he trusted what they could do in the right ones. He spent his last years building a chain of choices that would allow the younger generation to face evil on terms that did not corrupt them. He dared to believe that protection should ultimately give way to empowerment. Beyond the battles and the plans, there was a private man. He loved lemon sherbets and phoenix song, the quiet of his office when the portraits were asleep, the gleam of the lake at dusk, the way a first year's face brightens when they finally master a stubborn charm. He carried in his pocket no charmed mirror that could show him Ariana as she might have been. He carried instead a weight that kept him honest. Grief had broken him once, and then become the mortar that held his rebuilt self together. He did not seek absolution. He sought usefulness. He also wrestled with temptation long after his youth. The Hallows remained a story that pressed on his mind like the memory of a road not taken. He turned away because he understood that mastery over death is a hunger that eats the soul. He took up instead a different mastery, gentler and far more demanding, the art of making space for others to become fully themselves. He knew the difference between control and stewardship. He tried, with mixed success, to choose the latter. People argue about him still. They should. Greatness that cannot be questioned is merely force. Greatness worth remembering is a conversation that continues. Albus Dumbledore belongs to that second kind. He invites debate. He requires nuance. He resists reduction to a single sentence. The simplest truth about him is this: he did what he thought was necessary to preserve the possibility of goodness in a world that constantly forgets what goodness asks of us. The harder truth is that in doing so, he often asked others to walk through darkness without telling them how long the night would last. Yet think of the students he formed. Think of the courage he praised, the loyalty he honored, the wit he delighted in, the resilience he modeled. Think of the boy who once hoarded trophies and later learned to share triumph. Think of the girl who doubted her place and later led others through fire. Think of the timid child who learned that kindness is a strength that does not need applause. Dumbledore's most enduring magic was not in his duels or his discoveries. It was in the ordinary alchemy by which he turned young fear into adult fortitude. Consider also his adversaries. Grindelwald, who forced him to define the difference between vision and domination. Tom Riddle, who forced him to accept that empathy without boundaries becomes permission for evil. Severus Snape, who forced him to design a plan in which remorse could be useful without being sainted. Each of these relationships sharpened his sense of what a leader can and cannot do without losing the right to lead. The world he left behind was not healed. No world ever island. The world he left behind was teachable. That is the best a teacher can accomplish. He made the next chapter possible. He trusted that others would write it. He let go when it was time to let go. And that, perhaps, is the deepest difference between him and the friend of his youth who chose conquest. To let go is an act of faith in other people. To cling is an act of faith in oneself alone. Dumbledore chose the harder faith. Walk again through the house in Godric's Hollow. Hear the floorboards complain. See a boy reading by the window, while a sister hums to herself in a room where the light must be filtered and soft. Feel a mother's worry like rain that never stops. Then step forward along a path of classrooms and corridors, letters and late nights, friendships that lift and friendships that burn. Stand in the cold wind of a mountaintop and watch a phoenix rise. Follow a wand's arc through blazing air. Return to the lake and the twilit towers. Ask yourself, what kind of wisdom you trust when the hour is late and the stakes are cruel. Perhaps the answer is not in a single act, but in a pattern. Albus Dumbledore failed and learned, feared and acted, loved and let go. He guarded what was fragile and confronted what was ferocious. He believed that every soul can choose, and that the duty of the wise is to keep that choice alive. He would not be flattered by sainthood. He would accept responsibility, accept debate, accept the ache that comes when a good decision still hurts someone who does not deserve to hurt. That is not the comfort people hope for from legends. It is the truth they need. In the end, imagine him in his office after midnight, the castle muted, the quills quiet, the moon sliding a pale hand over shelves of memory. He stands at the window and considers the line between secrecy and trust, between planning and presumption, between mercy and enabling. He knows he has not always found the perfect balance. He also knows that perfection is a mirage that lures the proud to ruin. He has chosen instead the craft of tending a flawed world with flawed tools, steady hands, and unflinching eyes. When morning comes, students will spill into corridors, buzzing with rumors and laughter and the complicated music of growing up. He will meet them with patience and humor. He will make mistakes and correct them. He will tell the truth and sometimes hold it back until it can be heard. He will push the brave to be gentle and the gentle to be brave. He will keep watch over the place where their futures are incubated. He will do it until he cannot, and then he will trust that the work goes on. This is how a legend ought to be measured, not by how loudly the world applauds, but by how quietly the world heals after the noise has faded. Albus Dumbledore was a steward of that healing. He was a maker of choices, a bearer of grief, a breaker of tyrants, a teacher of the young, a friend to the flawed, and a reminder that light without humility burns rather than guides. He stood at the hinge of an age and held the door long enough for others to pass through. He left behind no empire, only courage. And because of that, the world he guarded remembers not just his power, but his restraint, not just his victories, but his wisdom, not just the myth of his name, but the humanity that made the myth possible. If you seek the core of him, look where the bright stories rarely look. He is in the quiet apology to a colleague he once overshadowed. He is in the watchful hour he spends with a child nobody else understands. He is in the letter he writes and never sends, the one that begins with the name of a sister and ends with a promise to do better than yesterday. He is in the decision to step aside when applause is loudest. He is in the way he teaches others to face death with open eyes and unclosed hearts. The tale of Albus Dumbledore is not a hymn to perfection. It is a study in the discipline of goodness. It shows how knowledge without humility curdles into harm, how love without judgment dissolves into indulgence, how courage without patience collapses into rashness. It shows, too, how a person can recover from failure and refuse to be defined by it, how a teacher can save a life by believing in it, how a leader can carry a burden and still make room for hope. Stand at the edge of the Black Lake one last time. Feel the cold in your lungs. See the reflection of the towers, tall and patient in the water. Somewhere in the castle of Phoenix turns its head and looks toward the coming day. It will sing again. The song will be both lament and lullaby, sorrow and solace, the sound of endings that become beginnings. That is the key Dumbledore leaves in our hands. Face loss without surrendering to it. Face power without worshiping it. Face the future without assuming you own it. And when the hour grows dark and the road narrows, remember the man whose wisdom was paid for in tears. Remember the headmaster who chose stewardship over dominion. Remember the strategist who refused to let strategy devour compassion. Remember the friend who failed and atoned. Remember the guardian who trusted those he loved enough to let them risk everything. The world is safer not because he forbid danger, but because he taught others how to meet it without losing themselves. The story closes where it began, in a quiet village and a quiet office, with a quiet man who knew that the loudest truths are the ones you live rather than the ones you shout. Albus Dumbledore walked a path lit by insight and shadowed by remorse. He kept walking. He asked the same of us. That is his legacy. That is his gift. That is why, long after the Phoenix's final note fades across the water, the castle still seems to breathe with his patience, and the world he left behind still feels braver than it did before he arrived.